families, both here and at home. I'm Miss Teri. Y'all can sit down. I'm going to talk for a while. Y'all can sit down. Last week, I gave a shout out to some of the kids that were here for the first time in a long time, and there's some more of you here this morning. So glad to see you. This week, I want to give a shout out to some of the kids who are still at home. I just want you to know that I still am thinking about you. I miss you, Jesse, Daniel, Alice, Mary, Caleb, Aiden, Audrey. Okay, all of you, Kiana, Jace, I could keep going. But I just want you to know that I love you, and I'm thinking about you, and I'm so glad that you're still hanging in there with us. And I want you to take a time this morning, especially you kids that are at home, to hug your parents, because they have looked at what's going on around, and they have looked at you, and they know what's best for you. And you might be a little bit disappointed that you're at home. You might be a little bit disappointed that you're here. But your parents love you. They know what's best for you, and I want you to hug them and tell them thank you for that. And you know what? There's somebody else who loves you and knows you really, really well, and that's Jesus. And I'm going to tell you a Jesus story today because, I love stories. That hasn't changed. And the story I want to tell you today is from Luke. Let me give you a little bit of background about the culture in Jesus' time. Women had a little bit of different role in that time than they do now. But women were a little less independent. They were more dependent on their fathers or their husbands or their sons to take care of and provide for them. Now, that's not to say that those mamas didn't work just as hard as mamas do. Probably, maybe even harder in some ways. But they had to really depend on their men in their family to take care of them. So one day, Jesus was going into a village, and the name of that village was Nain. And as Jesus and his disciples and a crowd that was following him were going into Nain, there was a group of people coming out, and they were part of a funeral procession. And the funeral was for the son of a woman who had lost her husband, and that made her a widow. That's what they call a woman whose husband has passed away. And so the widow was coming with all of her family and friends, and her only son had died. And Jesus was coming in, and he knew how hard her life was going to be now that she'd lost both her husband and her only son. And he was so compassionate. He had so much love for her because he knew her situation, and he knew what was happening. And he walked up to her in the middle of all the people that are following him and all the people that are following her, and he said, "Don't cry." And he walked up to the casket where her son was, and he touched it, and he said, "Young man, sit up." And this boy who had been dead sat up in the middle of the funeral and started talking. And the people just went nuts. They were like, "Did you see that? Jesus just raised this little boy, and now he's going to be able to take care of his mother." And so that story is in Luke chapter 7. Just in the next chapter, in Luke chapter 8, there's another story of a child. This one is about his dad. And his dad was a little bit like Miguel. Hang on now. It's a good thing. His name was Jairus, and he was the leader of the synagogue in that area. So a little bit like Miguel is our pastor. This was the pastor of the church. And he came to Jesus, and he fell down on his knees, and he said, "Jesus, my only daughter, who is 12 years old, is dying. Can you please come and heal her?" He knew that the only one who could help him was Jesus. That's another thing he has in common with Miguel. Miguel knows the only person sometimes that can help him is Jesus. And that's true for us. And so Jesus said, "Yes, I will come with you." So as they were going back to Jairus' house, a messenger came from his house and said, "Don't bother the teacher anymore. Your daughter has died." And Jesus heard that message, and he said, "Jairus, don't be afraid. Have faith." And they kept on going to Jairus' house, And when they got there, there were all these people in the house, and they were wailing and crying and weeping. And Jesus said, "Don't cry. She's not dead. She's just asleep." Well, those people laughed at Jesus. They were like, "You just walked in the door. You don't know what's going on here. Yeah, she's dead." And Jesus told all the people to leave. He took Jairus and his wife, the child's mother and father, and he went in and he took Peter and James and John, 3 of his very good friends, and he went in and he took the little girl by the hand and he said, "Little girl, sit up." And she sat up. She stood up, and he said, "Hey, you better give her some food because she's going to be hungry." And she lived. She lived. And what I want all of you kids to remember is that that same Jesus loves us, loves you that same way. And just like he knew what was going on with those people, he knows what's going on with you. He knows if you're happy because you just got the high score on that video game. He knows if you're sad because it's raining and you can't go out and play. He knows if you're mad because mom just said you couldn't do anything else until you clean your room. I mean, what? It's going to get dirty again. Oh. He knows when you're scared. It's like, what do you mean there's this disease that people could get and I have to stay home? He knows you. He knows everything about you, and he loves you. And I want you to remember that this week as we go into a time of worship. Remember, he knows you. He knows where you are, and he loves you very much.